My name is Scott. I have been to this program before. I hope a lot of you have seen Archives content here. How many have seen anything Dark Lacrosse before? That's fantastic. So we just a brief synopsis of it, and then actually one of our episodes will have Anita Taylor Doring, recently retired archivist and archives department manager. She's on both of these episodes that we're going to show today, but at the end of the second episode, she does a really nice job of kind of long program overview, starting with our walking tours in 2013, trolley tours with Explore Lacrosse that still are ongoing in the summer, the stage production, the Dark Lacrosse show, which we have presented at this program before in previous years, into the Dark Lacrosse Stories project, which is what I'm going to share today. And then also the Rivertown TV show, which is, I think that's the most recent reason I came to this program, was to talk about Rivertown. We won an Emmy for that, one of our episodes. And so I think we were here for that program. We actually had the Emmy in the room. Hopefully some of you were at that program. That was pretty cool. Today, what I'd like to share with you is our two most recent episodes. They came out in December. And so if you are paying attention to this, you can watch these on YouTube. This is the La Crosse Public Library's YouTube page. There is a playlist, Dark Lacrosse Stories playlist, where all 67 episodes are there. If you've never heard of this before, they are anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes usually. They are the seedy criminal underbelly history of lacrosse, but not all of them. Some of them are more biography. That's what this first episode is going to be, a little bit more biography of a person. I'm guessing nobody in this room has heard of Walter Getzinger. Anybody heard of Walter Getzinger? Unless you've seen these episodes, you probably have not heard of Walter Getzinger. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to watch episode 66 and episode 67. So episode 66 is called The Rivoli's Blind Organist. And then the episode 67 is the continuation of his story. And that's the one that's going to get a little more into crime, like an actual, and so I think you guys are all of age here. Usually we put content warnings usually on some of these episodes that they're more like PG-13 type content. So that one will be that. This first episode won't be that, but I think we're all of age here. I think we don't have to worry about that so much. Just as a intro to it and how we come across these stories. So this is a perfect example of, I'm going to try to find it here. See if I got it up. Two screens here. I think I've got my one. There it is. When we're doing research for patrons or helping patrons do research, we do a lot of newspaper research. And so we're in the Tribune a lot and we come across things, right? So this is actually a headline we saw. I can't remember if it was me or somebody else in my department. This is years ago. We waited to develop this story till like last year. But we came across this article. Blind pianist sues wife for divorce. And we thought, that's fascinating. This isn't interesting. So the article says Walter Getzinger's Lacrosse's well-known blind organist is suing his wife Louise for divorce. And then down in the second paragraph, it says the first intimation of a rift within the lute. And I was like, what does that even mean? Anybody know what rift within the lute means? This is from 1917, by the way. So it's a turn of phrase basically that says a small thing that becomes a big deal. So the thing that caused a divorce, basically, rift within the lute. In the Getzinger menage, again, I don't know what you guys, menage to me means something dirty, right? A menage a trois, right? But menage just means household, I guess. That's what the word means. So menage a trois is a household of three. Now it's become something else, obviously. But so I read that line and I thought, wow, there's a lot going on here. So that came a short time ago when the blind musician caused to be published in the local papers a notice that he would no longer be responsible for any bills contracted by his wife. Fascinating. So we found that article. So when we had a chance, we went and found that thing, which is this. And I'll get that off the screen, but it says, this is Walter Getzinger. So again, the blind organist. This is all we know about him, is he's a blind organist in 1917. I hereby notify you and each of you that from and after this date, I will not be responsible for any debt, obligation, or liability, claim, or demand incurred by my wife, Louise M. Getzinger, in any amount or upon any account whatsoever. So we're like, what is going on in this marriage? So then we looked into it further. And this is where we got to. So then we started searching Walter Getzinger. We have a nice newspaper database you can access to find things. So we searched his name. And here we found from 1910, this beautiful advertisement for the Majestic Theater. And one of the attractions is Walter Getzinger playing every night. So now we've got a story to look up. We're going to learn about this guy. So that's what these episodes are. So the first one is more a biography about him. And then there's a really interesting later connection back to him in another story. So those are the two episodes we're going to watch today. So let me get that back out now.
La Crosse Public Library Archives presents Dark La Crosse Stories, a series in collaboration with La Crosse Tribune, featuring the seedier side of La Crosse, Wisconsin's history. These true stories are reflections of their time and place in history. The intent is not to diminish the human suffering that may have resulted from these events, but to bring light to ways in which people in the past experienced life. The city of La Crosse and the locations where these stories took place occupy part of a vast network of the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk. And we thank our Ho-Chunk community members and their ancestors for their stewardship of this area's land and history.
In September of 1920, the exciting place to be was the newly built theater in downtown La Crosse, the Rivoli. Such was its splendor, the La Crosse Tribune struggled to capture its magnificence in ink, though they tried with the following description.
The New Rivoli Theater is a noble place to be, an edifice that is not a whit over-described by the word grandeur, but it is a difficult place to portray in words. A description must take it up detail by detail and explain its beauties piecemeal. That fails to give the complete effect, because the Rivoli is one of those successes of harmonious architectural and decorative effort, in which every part is graceful and beautiful, and the whole is more than the sum of its parts. The Rivoli would be stately and impressive without a brush mark, simply by virtue of its clean proportions, sweeping lines, and well-handled masses. Add the charming decorations, which emphasize the architectural grace, which give a note of color fittingly restrained and subdued to harmony instead of contrast. The delicate colors of the lighting system and the tones and shadings permitted by its control to bring out the lines and shadows of the theater's architecture and the harmonies of its decorative scheme of walls and hangings. Then, as a medium for the proper seeing of the whole, let the great organ fill the structure with rolling and crashing and pealing harmonies, or if the mood suits, with flutings and whisperings, not until the whole effect is complete in its details of line, color, light, and harmony does the beholder get the full beauty of the Rivoli. The creator of the grand organ inside the Rivoli was a musician named Walter Getzinger, a quote, wizard of music. It was built according to the ideas and specifications of Getzinger and initially turned down by two famous organ makers before a third stated, quote, it could be done, but nobody could play it after it was finished. Walter Getzinger made a name for himself through his musical talent several years prior to the Rivoli's erection. Born visually impaired, he graduated from the Janesville School for the Blind. He spent some time living in Milwaukee and even New York City before moving to La Crosse in 1906 at the age of 21. Described as a rare genius with perfect technique, Getzinger started out playing in area theaters and parlors such as the Hotel La and the Bijou, performing concerts and scoring silent movies.
Marvelous. The man is simply marvelous. I saw him 2 nights ago at the Bijou, and would you believe it? He offered to play any song as long as the requester could whistle it for him first. And by golly, he did it. The man is a genius.
Though Getzinger was born blind, he never stopped meeting with specialists about the possibility of recovering his sight. Through a recommendation from Dr. John Bradfield in 1912, he was put in touch with Dr. D. Woods of Chicago, known to be one of the best eye specialists in the country who, after hearing Getzinger's case, believed there was hope for restoration. The next time Getzinger's name pops up in the Tribune, he was throwing a benefit concert to raise funds for an eye surgery, though not his own.
Apparently, they both went to see that specialist in Chicago, and despite the doctor telling Mr. Getzinger that nothing could be done for his own eyesight, his wife's vision could be improved, and now the man is hosting a concert to raise money for her procedure. What a dear!
The outcome of the surgery for Louise Getzinger is unknown, as there is no further mention of her optical health in the papers. The notoriety of her husband, however, continued to grow over the years. By 1915, Getzinger's life appeared to be a successful one. He was widely recognized for his musical talent and well-liked among society. He was working regularly at the best movie houses in La Crosse, performing silent film scores live. 2 years later, however, fans may have been surprised to read in the La Crosse Tribune the following notice.
La Crosse, Wisconsin, April 25th, 1917. To all merchants, dealers, and others interested, and to the public in general, I hereby notify each of you that from and after this date, I will not be responsible for any debt, obligation, or liability, claim, or demand incurred by my wife, Louise N. Getzinger, in any amount or upon any account whatsoever. Signed, Walter Getzinger.
A court hearing in mid-December of 1917 began the case of Getzinger versus Getzinger, with the courtroom filled by friends of both parties. Rumors of sensational charges against Walter Getzinger made by his wife Louise made the trial even more of a spectacle.
Isn't it sad that their 3 children aren't even staying with the family now? They're being looked after by relatives in Milwaukee, and after all they've both overcome, I heard he's denied his wife the use of their home and vehicle.
The court ordered Walter to pay $15 a week to his wife, so she's not without some means. Yes, me, she's getting more than she should.
Ruled by Judge Higbee, with the jury made up of 12 married men, the trial began on December 19th. Walter Getzinger was suing his wife on the charge of misconduct. The witness statements against her depicting multiple accounts of raucous behavior, hotel stays with several different men, and indecent dress after she was kicked out of a community dance for wearing a short skirt. Thomas Dowling, a machinist from La Crosse, and Harry Stone, a boxer from Milwaukee, both testified to taking Mrs. Getzinger out on multiple occasions. They believed Mrs. Louise Getzinger was Miss Louise Martin.
So many witness accounts of neighbors seeing a man enter Mrs. Getzinger's home through a side window. They say she's been attending parties at roadhouses and dances where drinking is involved.
Throughout the trial, Louise Getzinger tried to explain or deny the charges against her. Attempts to discredit the character of her husband Walter, saying he too had been unfaithful, all failed. His notoriety as a local talent and the fact that he was visually impaired and yet able to perform so prodigiously seemed to steer the public's view to Walter's side of the story.
If the worst thing she can say about him is that he drinks sometimes, all I can say is what hard-working man doesn't?
Louise broke down in tears while on the stand. She denied having been inside any saloons and instead named several of the witnesses as men who tried to sell her an automobile. She claimed she had never gone out all night with Thomas Dowling and only registered at the hotel as Miss Martin because she was too embarrassed to register as a married woman alone. In counter to Harry Stone's testimony, Louise stated she knew Harry and had accepted money from him, but only because she was starving and had not yet received her alimony. Did he promise to marry you? Asked James Thompson, attorney for her husband. I don't know, replied Louise. Well, isn't it a fact he wanted to marry you? Asked Thompson again. Well, I just don't know, said Louise. She paused a long moment, then added, I don't know how to put it.
I hate to see any woman made into a spectacle in public. Women are judged so harshly as it is. But even if she didn't visit the saloons like they said, she admitted going to hotels with Mr. Stone.
And what about Stone promising to make prize fighters out of her children?
Then she admitted to allowing another man,
Albert Herman, a whiskey salesman, and quite her senior. The man was nearly 70 years old.
Yes, that's the one. She admitted to letting him kiss her. She said it was only on the forehead and that she only permitted it because her mother told her to be nice to him. But why was he in her home with her alone? It's all so distressing.
Witness accounts by men who claimed to have fooled around with Mrs. Getzinger grew to be more scandalous and ridiculous as the case went on. Louise's attorney attempted to get one witness to declare he'd been bribed to testify against Louise, though he claimed that was false and he had indeed fooled around with her. The courtroom full of the gossiping public began laughing so loud that Judge Higbee reprimanded them, scolding, quote, all of you are privileged to remain, but you may not whisper, talk, or laugh, and if there is any further demonstration, I will order the sheriff to clear the courtroom. Of the myriad men who testified to being out with Louise Getzinger, it was Harry Stone, the Milwaukee boxer, who the plaintiff's attorney spent the most time on. Stone admitted to registering with Louise at several hotels, as well as naming numerous instances of misconduct. For her defense, Louise stated that Stone was insane. She had no idea what he was talking about and denied all allegations. Evidence brought forth noted that Harry Stone fell 4 stories as a child, suffering injuries to the head. However, he had required medical attention for the last 10 years and claimed to be of sound mind.
Getzinger's brother William took the stand as a witness to Louise and Stone's frivolities. He's a policeman in Milwaukee, and he saw the pair kissing in a doorway for over an hour.
After that testimony, Getzinger's lawyer smartly rested his case. The jury only deliberated for 30 minutes. Seems like they believed the testimonies of Harry Stone and Thomas Dowling. They found Louise guilty on 3 accounts of misconduct.
Following the divorce proceedings in December of 1917, custody of the Getzinger children, ages 9, 7, and 5, was awarded to William Getzinger, the police officer and brother of Walter, who lived in Milwaukee. However, Louise's mother made claims to the court that William was pro-German and therefore disloyal to the United States. Unable to substantiate her claims with any tangible evidence, Judge Higbee dismissed her protest, and another dramatic scene unfolded in the courthouse when Louise and her mother bid tearful goodbyes to the three children as they left. Since it was Louise who was found to be ill-fit morally, it was she who was denied custody of her children and allowed visitation only once per month. Family members of Louise stated they witnessed Walter's abuse of Louise, listing choking, hitting, and name-calling in an attempt to impact the custody hearing. Denied by Walter, it almost didn't matter at this point in the legal proceedings, as a statement came from a La Crosse attorney indicating Louise had threatened to shoot her children rather than have them taken from her. Once more, Louise denied making any such statement. After having granted the divorce, Judge Higbee granted temporary custody of the children to their uncle in Milwaukee, and in a separate hearing 2 months later, agreed to custody by their father. With help from Walter's stepparents, the court allowed the children to live in La Crosse, which increased visitation for Louise from once per month to every 2 weeks. Only the settlement of property remained to be assessed.
How do you like that? She was originally awarded a car, but ends up with a commode.
You shouldn't poke fun. Mrs. Getzinger is clearly a woman facing many tribulations.
The initial award by Judge Higbee to Louise Getzinger included the choice between an automobile or $650 cash. However, a later decree came down superseding the original award and instead entitled Louise to just a dresser, a commode, and a set of china dishes gifted by her mother. Little of Louise Getzinger was mentioned again, except for a return to her maiden name of Martin about a year after the legal battle. Around that same time, in 1919, Walter remarried to Lily Lowry of Waukesha. The couple lived on State Street in La Crosse with his children. It seems Walter's name would always find its way into the papers, first for fame due to his musical talent, then for the salacious divorce trial. Just 4 months after his second marriage, his name again appeared in the La Crosse Tribune after surviving an explosion at the Bijou Theater where he was scoring a film.
The fire started near the box office and swept into the projection room. All the gas was coming through a vent that built up and blew out 2 of the windows. 9 people were injured. And while everyone was fleeing the theater, Walter kept playing the organ.
Did no one tell him they were evacuating? I heard 75 people ran out of the building from every exit. Lucky for them, the projection room contained most of the explosion. It was the folks nearest that room, or a few in front, who suffered injuries. One of them was Gordon Getzinger, the 8-year-old son of our blind organist. He's lucky to be alive. The theater operator was so badly burned, he was taken to St. Francis Hospital.
Walter Getzinger continued to score movies almost nightly at theaters in La Crosse. His ability to memorize multiple film plots and time his compositions accordingly was astounding. So when the new Rivoli Theater opened its doors in 1920, it's no wonder they allowed Getzinger to design his own organ, and that it became the focal point of the theater's majesty. The stunning structure the La Crosse Tribune struggled to put into print became the place where Getzinger played his custom organ for the next 5 years. By 1925, the organist who overcame severe visual impairment to become a beloved part of the cultural fabric of La Crosse said a bittersweet farewell at a banquet thrown by the local musicians union in his honor. Walter Getzinger was leaving the Crosse and the Rivoli for Milwaukee. For 15 years here in La Crosse, Getzinger was an admired and respected musician and considered a friend by many in the area. Sentiments of gratitude and best wishes went around on both ends, but it was his duty, Getzinger felt, to follow an opportunity that beckoned him to a larger crowd. Getzinger was off to a new beginning in Milwaukee, but his name would be far from forgotten in La Crosse headlines or the courtroom. His story continues in the next Dark La Crosse Stories episode. And now I'd like to welcome in Anita Taylor-Doring, Senior Archivist and Archives Department Manager at the La Crosse Public Library, who did some of the initial research for this story.
Despite his physical challenges, Walter Getzinger arrived on the La Crosse music scene at only 21 years of age in 1906. He attended the State School for the Blind in Janesville, Wisconsin, and maintained ties with the school, doing various fundraising, concerts, and giving back to the school that gave him an opportunity to showcase his notable accomplishments in his chosen field. He had an uncanny memory coupled with perfect technique, which allowed him to play any tune on piano or organ if someone could whistle or hum it. He kept up with current musical styles by having someone else versed in music read him the latest sheet music of popular songs. One of his specialties became playing the organ in local theaters to accompany silent films in La Crosse. From experts I've talked to about this, some sort of short summary or key often accompanied the film reels, but regularly went missing as the canisters were shipped from one theater to the next or back to the company headquarters. Sometimes the key would simply be how to make certain sound effects on the organ, such as rain, wind, airplane noise, bullets, or bombs exploding. There wasn't any written score, so each organist had to interpret the scene and improvise, building up drama or tension and releasing it at the right time. That would be a difficult task for anyone, but especially a musician who did not have sight. While the newspaper articles never say, someone may have coached Getzinger as to what was happening while the film was flickering on the silver screen, although it is said that he astounded theater goers with his ability to memorize multiple film plots and time his compositions accordingly. When Getzinger moved to La Crosse in 1906, there were only two theaters, the Bijou and the La Crosse Theater, and the organist played at both. More than just films were shown, these were venues for vaudeville and local performances. As Getzinger's local popularity rose in 1915, the number of theaters had grown to 8, including 2 on La Crosse's north side. By the time the Rivoli Theater arrived on the scene in 1920, there was not only the Bijou and La Crosse, but also the Casino, Dome, Majestic, Rex, Rialto, and Strand, all much smaller than the Grand Rivoli. The Rivoli's sister theater, the Riviera, opened on the north side only 1 month after the Rivoli in October of 1920 and was a smaller version of its south side sister, but was also designed by La Crosse architects Parkinson and Dockendorf, and the interior decoration was left to the Oyen firm. At that time, the Cooper Amusement Company operated not only the Rivoli and Riviera, but the smaller Casino, Strand, and Rialto theaters as well. When Getzinger left La Crosse in 1925, there were 6 theaters or movie houses. But Getzinger wanted to pursue more opportunities and larger audiences, so he, his children, and his second wife Lily headed to Milwaukee. Once the age of silent movies had faded away for good by the end of the decade, Getzinger had to reinvent himself. He continued his career in a more low-key way and was heard on regional radio waves for several years, sometimes with his wife lending vocal accompaniment. Stay tuned for part 2 of Walter Getzinger's story after moving to Milwaukee. Perhaps Walter's life would have made for a great dramatic film with synchronized sound and a musical score. Thanks for listening.
So a couple things I want to highlight that you probably noticed the closed captioning on that is not in sync perfectly, right? That's AI generated. That's what happens sometimes with that. So the closed captions will stay on. I do also want to note that Jonathan Gillette right here, he's the owner of the Rivoli. He was the voice at the very beginning of the episode talking about the Rivoli, and they have graciously put a slide up for all the movies that they show at the Rivoli. There's slides ahead of the movie, just like you have for this program. And you can, it's a QR code to watch that episode. So I really appreciated the Rivoli working with us on that. Second thing I want to note before we watch the next episode is the music you're hearing is Luke Thering. So he's a local pianist, and he created an amazing score for that episode and the next episode. He composes all the music and plays it. He works here at the library, and he's been working with us on the Dark Cross program ever since the start. Here's the second one. Also including Getzinger's family, we heard a little bit at the very end of that first episode about his son, Gordon. Gordon was hurt in the explosion at the fire. This episode is involving Gordon a little bit more, and then also more about Walter.
The seedier side of La Crosse, Wisconsin's history. These true stories are reflections of their time and place in history, of this area's land and history.
Walter Getzinger, known throughout the Midwest as the famous blind organist, moved away from La Crosse in 1925, looking for a larger market. While Walter had terrific hearing, could play a number of instruments, and also composed original music, his notoriety came from scoring organ music for silent films. Films would arrive in large canisters to a theater, but often without any notes on how to score the film. Competition for the best organist to play at local theaters was intense, and despite Walter's visual impairment, he was considered the best musician for this type of work. After a messy and very public divorce from his wife Louise in La Crosse, Walter married a former teacher at the State School for the Blind in Janesville, Lily Lowry, who was a soprano singer. The couple decided to move to Milwaukee so that Walter could work in a West Side theater. Walter had 3 children from his earlier marriage who lived with him. What should have been a routine day like any other in his new hometown was catastrophically upended. On October 18, 1927, Lily had just sent the 2 younger children to bed when a police officer arrived at the doorstep to tell her that Walter's 16-year-old son, Gordon, had been shot by Fred Scholes while walking along 49th Street and was likely to die. Described as valiant in his efforts to live, Gordon remained conscious almost up to the time of death. Due to his injuries, Gordon Getzinger died Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Walter had been familiar with the Scholes family for 11 years in La Crosse. Fred, the accused assassin, was a streetcar operator who had a couple of accidents on the job, forcing the family to move. His wife Emma helped Walter read new sheet music so he could keep up with new musical trends. The Scholes family followed the Getzingers to Milwaukee. Walter and his family had welcomed Mrs. Emma Scholes and her 3 children, ages 12 and under, into their home following a separation from her husband 2 months prior to the shooting. The shooting took place near the Getzinger home as Gordon walked Emma to a bus stop nearby. Neither of them knew that Fred Scholes lurked outside, waiting in a jealous rage with a rifle in his hands. First, he gunned down Gordon, who had stepped in front of Emma to shield her, then turned his attention on Emma while she attempted to flee. Shot in the back of the head, she died instantly from the attack. Miraculously, Gordon managed to drag himself to a neighbor's door. Fred intended to take his own life, shooting himself in the eye, which blinded him on one side, but did not prove fatal. The shootings took place outside the Bethel Jewish temple, causing worshippers to step outside, many witnessing Emma fall to the ground and Fred's attempted suicide. Newspapers in Milwaukee and La Crosse reported this story as Emma's mother, Mrs. Teresa Tracy, still lived in La Crosse and, most shockingly, allied herself with the man who murdered her daughter.
Emma should have taken him back. If they try to send Fred over the road for this, I'll do all I can to help him. I've always liked Fred. Fred has his faults, everybody has, but I've always overlooked them. He had so many good points to outweigh them. If they had only stayed here in La Crosse, this terrible thing would never have happened. I'd have had them together again in 2 days. He loved her so much. I never saw another man have greater love for a woman, but he was so jealous that he wanted no one to visit with her. Why, he even disliked my visiting her. He wanted her just for himself. You know, Emma was a very pretty woman. She made friends easily, but Fred wanted her to talk only to him. Since they separated 2 months ago, Fred has been all alone with no one to go to. She would have taken him back. I know he would have been good to her.
Police described the crime as one of careful planning, noting that Fred Scholes made out a will the day prior, wrote a letter to his Aunt Minnie instructing her to look after his children, rented a car, purchased a rifle, and waited near the Getzinger home to spot his wife. While being questioned at the hospital, Fred told the police superintendent,
Because I love her, I shot her. I made up my mind that I would end it all.
Emma and Fred had been married for 15 years, living in Milwaukee only for the last year. Emma filed for divorce in August, citing cruel and inhumane treatment. She also filed for custody of their 3 children. While living with the Getzingers, according to Emma's friends, she was scared to go out alone at night, fearing her husband's retaliation and rage. For this reason, Gordon Getzinger was escorting her to the bus stop so that she could finalize the details of sending her children to the Lutheran Children's Home of Wauwatosa, pending final settlement of the divorce action.
I intended to kill young Getzinger as well as my wife when I shot them Tuesday night. It was no accident that I killed the boy.
Scholes' statement of intent surprised detectives, who originally assumed the 16-year-old was shot accidentally when he stepped in front of Emma. According to the police, Scholes' antipathy for the boy grew out of intense jealousy. After conversations with his wife grew more estranged, he believed she was happier away from him than she was with him. Somehow, Scholes connected her change in attitude with her connection to the 16-year-old Gordon. Despite their age difference, Scholes convinced himself that Gordon must be in love with his wife and that she returned the affection.
Fred was a boy of very good habits. He didn't drink, he didn't chase other women, he didn't even look at other women. Like anybody else, they had troubles, and Fred would go away for a day or 2 until he got over it. Then he'd come back. He'd always come back. And things would be all right again for years. He wanted to come back now, and would have if she had let him. That's where she made her mistake. My Emma was a good woman too. Don't misunderstand me on that. She was pretty, a good housekeeper, a good piano player, and had no bad habits. She was always a good, straight girl. She never did anything wrong or got into any trouble, and she made a good wife for Fred. But she was a bit unappreciative. I know she was ready for death, though, and I'm grateful for that. She was afraid of him and thought he might kill her. She knew he could not live without her, and that one would have to die if they could not go along together. She told a friend in Milwaukee a little while ago that she was prepared for death, and that's some consolation.
Mrs. Tracy received a letter from Scholes sometime after her daughter began divorce proceedings. In it, Scholes' intentions were clear.
Dearest mother-in-law, please forgive me everything. I had a case of nerves and she could not forgive. I guess she did not want to. Please see that the children are kept together if possible. Take a certain amount monthly from the policies for their care. I know you'll love them. Furniture to you if you want it. Fred. P.S. I called up Emma again yesterday on the phone and begged her to give me another chance, but she absolutely refused. All my good deeds are entirely forgotten. I loved her so. She told me she was sorry she had not left me before. After that, I saw red. She should not have said that.
While Schultz remained in the hospital, his brother Arthur arrived from Alaska to collect the three Schultz children: John, age 12, Mary, age 10, and Jean, age 7. Believing his brother had become mentally unbalanced, he brought sacks of fruit and candy for the children, placed them on a train with orders for the brakeman to watch over them as they made their way to La Crosse to stay with family, eventually living with Arthur and his own 5 children. Arthur stayed behind in Milwaukee to collect the body of Emma and bring her home to La Crosse for funeral services. Schultz was expected to recover apart from total blindness. First in the eye he shot, and ultimately both eyes, and so 2 warrants were issued, each with a charge of murder.
I was a fool, and I made a fool of myself chasing after my wife. I wanted to be back with my wife for the sake of the children, as I wanted to keep them together and never wanted them to be brought up in any kind of institution. I only meant to scare them when I got out of the car, Emma and the Getzinger boy. I'm sorry they're dead, but the Getzinger boy was the cause of it.
When it came time for the trial to begin on November 2nd, 1927, the newspapers reported the dramatic story. Quote, facing a life of darkness into which he was plunged by his own hand after he had killed his wife and a 16-year-old boy who sought to shield her, Fred Schultz, Milwaukee milk driver, formerly of La Crosse, was led falteringly into district court today to face charges of murder. Blinded by the shots he intended to end his life, Schultz faces charges that may send him to state prison for the rest of his life. Unquote. Fred Schultz would plead
Not guilty.
Schultz's attorney, Cornelius Hanley, entered the not guilty plea on the grounds of temporary insanity. As the case progressed, 3 psychiatrists were brought in to determine the state of Fred's mind on October 18th. A group of 5 women and 7 men made up the jury. Multiple character witnesses, including the Crosse family and friends, were called to court in Milwaukee to speak on Fred's behalf. 2 previous employers spoke in his defense, as well as his mother-in-law and mother of the victim, Teresa Tracy. All of them stated that Schultz was well-mannered and unassuming. His brother Arthur testified that Schultz had not owned guns prior to this, nor did he know how to shoot. Perhaps the most surprising but significant piece of evidence that the prosecution brought forth was thanks to Milwaukee Police Department's Detective English, who searched for a hidden gun previously owned by Schultz. In an earlier report, this gun was fired by Schultz at his wife, Emma, though he missed. In anger, he threw the weapon itself at her. He missed again, causing the gun to tear through the wall and lodge itself between partitions. It remained there for years in a La Crosse residence on Hagar Street, where the couple lived years prior. The hidden gun, a .32 caliber revolver, and a contradictory piece of evidence to character witness statements, was now a major part of the state's case, citing earlier family quarrels and violence. Walter Getzinger, the 45-year-old blind organist and father of the slain 16-year-old Gordon, testified against the defendant along with his wife Lily. 14 witnesses to the shooting also testified as to the events of the attack. When it came time for Schultz to take the stand himself, it took nearly 2 hours to explain to the court and jury his emotional response that led him to temporary insanity.
I had often thought about suicide before October 18th, but had never considered the idea of killing my wife or anyone else prior to that day. I loved my wife and children more than anything in the world. When we got married, I was just 18 and Emma 19. We had no quarrels other than common family spats. We were happy until we came to Milwaukee. I suffered 2 serious accidents while operating a streetcar in La Crosse, which forced me to resign and move to Milwaukee. We'd known the Getzingers in La Crosse, and after we moved, resumed the friendship. But my wife wasn't happy with our home after seeing the Getzinger home. I worked 9 hours a day on the milk wagon, and I took a job on Saturday and Sunday at a filling station where I worked another 9 hours. I wanted to buy her comforts. Walter Getzinger would repeatedly say how he believed in divorce, having had a successful one himself. He'd say that in front of us. When we separated, she stopped talking to me for weeks. I wanted to reconcile.
When asked by District Attorney A.J. Beyer if he remembered the occasion when he attempted to choke his wife, Schultz responded,
No, sir.
When asked, was it not the possession of his wife instead of herself that he loved, Schultz responded,
I loved my wife herself and not the possession of her.
When asked if his wife was afraid of him, Schultz responded,
She said she was, but I don't know why.
When asked about the earlier altercation back in La Crosse, Schultz denied ever seeing or owning the .32 caliber revolver or being aware of his wife's story regarding the earlier alleged quarrel. Even when it came to the rifle he used on October 18th, he declared,
I don't remember buying the rifle.
Case proceedings continued to waver back and forth. Was Fred Schultz sane or not? Everyone in the courtroom was shocked the following morning when Emma's mother, Mrs. Teresa Tracy, left her seat and walked up to the front where Schultz and his lawyer were sitting.
Fred, I know you've always been a good boy, a good husband, a good father. We all love you, Fred.
The pair embraced, making a spectacle between bandages that covered Schultz's eyes and the tears rolling down the face of his mother-in-law. Later that week, Mrs. Tracy made her way to the witness stand.
I will tell the truth, although it hurts my own daughter's memory. This tragedy was her own fault. Fred Scholes was the best husband a girl ever had. He was a good father. He loved my daughter and their children. Both here and in La Crosse, he did all that he could for them. He worked day and night. Something must have happened that made Emma change so.
As the trial carried on into December, no clear solution proved imminent. One medical expert called to testify diagnosed Scholes as sane, but the defense physicians gave cause for doubt. Scholes broke down in his seat while listening to the prosecution recite a detailed description of the shooting, how he had trailed his wife, stepped out of the automobile, and fired the fatal shot to her head. Scholes pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it below the bandages over his sightless eyes. Before closing arguments were made, 2 more expert physicians were brought in to determine their opinions of Scholes' sanity or lack thereof. The defense claimed Scholes was a victim of circumstance, while the prosecution called him a, quote, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Finally, at 11:50 a.m. on December 2nd, the jury was retired to discuss 3 possible verdicts: guilty, not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, or not guilty. After 28 hours of deliberation and asking to view all the evidence again, the jury for the Scholes murder case was no closer to a verdict. Being a Saturday morning, the judge declared he would wait for a verdict the following Monday, and all court instructions to the jury were read through a second time. The difficulty in the case was the issue of temporary insanity. When the jury retired once more to deliberate further, members were so split that shouting voices could be heard from the jury room through a corridor and out into the courtroom. Finally, they reached a verdict. Fred Scholes was guilty of first-degree murder. In the hours and days following the guilty verdict, the defense requested a new trial, and 11 of the 12 jurors received threatening notes and telephone calls. Many in the public felt that the self-inflicted wounds Scholes faced were punishment enough, and that leaving 3 young children without a parent was too much. To show they cared, the jury assembled a Christmas box for the Scholes children. Scholes was sentenced to life in prison. When the judge asked Fred if he had anything he wished to say, Scholes answered,
I want to thank you for the consideration you have given me throughout the trial. I want you to know that I do not remember anything that happened on the night of the shooting. My mind was blank. I realized the seriousness of the crime, and I wish I could undo it.
Fred Scholes was taken to a pond to spend his remaining days behind bars in blindness. When asked what he thought about his sentence, he replied,
Well, it was as good as could be expected. If I had been acquitted, I wouldn't have known what to do. I hope for the best.
Scholes may have hoped for the best in the beginning, but the loss of his wife by his own hand, the separation from his children, the denial of a new trial, and the blindness that now overtook his days weighed heavily on Scholes' mental health. 15 months after Scholes entered prison, he took his own life by hanging. His body was found in his cell on a Saturday in March of 1929. Ironically, he is buried next to his slain wife in Oak Grove Cemetery. Time didn't stop for the families of the victims from that fateful shooting. The Scholes children lived briefly with their Uncle Arthur in Alaska until his death in 1928, and were later cared for in La Crosse by his Aunt Minnie, who Scholes had written to regarding his will and their trusts. Lily Getzinger, Gordon's stepmother, died from illness in 1934. By 1935, Walter Getzinger, once the famous blind musician with an organ inside the reveille designed to his specifications, had retired. The introduction of sound films slowly erased the need for his work, although Walter transitioned to radio and other live music venues. Getzinger moved to Janesville and lived with one of his sons for a short duration. In November of that year, he passed away at the age of 50 at the Badger Home for the Blind, succumbing to illness he battled for most of the year. His career spanned 32 years, 19 of which were spent in La Crosse's downtown theaters. We can only imagine the dynamic score Walter Getzinger would have composed for his own final act. And now I'd like to welcome in Anita Taylor-Doring, Senior Archivist and Archives Department Manager at the La Crosse Public Library, who did some of the initial research for this story.
The Walter Getzinger tale is a prime example of an engaging dark lacrosse story. The dark lacrosse suite of programming has grown and morphed into the stories format that we're sharing today. The experience began in 2013 as a downtown walking tour highlighting seedier themed events that occurred within a 1-mile trek. Step-out actors would walk amongst the audience to reenact some highlights of events to make the experience a little more dramatic. These were very successful and offered in the evening, and there were often waiting lists. We hosted almost 40 tours over the course of 18 months. While they were free, the library did accept donations. While walking around in the dark with strangers can be fun, even I noticed I was often distracted, especially between stops. When we talked to people about making a reservation for the tour, I often fielded questions related to the length and pace of the walk. The following year, Explore La Crosse reached out to the archives about hosting the downtown walking tour on the trolley to make the experience more accessible. We added some more content, and now we've been doing trolley tours during the summer for 10 years. And then I had an idea. I wanted to enhance the content with visuals and music appropriate to the time of the story being shared. We were successful in obtaining a Wisconsin Humanities grant to expand Dark Lacrosse program into a theatrical performance. We took the trolley tour, which was an expanded walking tour, and enhanced that even further into a stage show. Additional content was created, actors were enlisted to portray participants or witnesses to the stories, and we hired a brilliant composer, musician Luke Thering, who arranged to perform music for the shows, similar to Walter Getzinger, whose musical performances enhanced and accompanied the action of silent films. We also created a slideshow with historical images and newspaper headlines to play in the background. This format allowed for an expanding geographical area, which was no longer restricted to the downtown area like the walking and trolley tours, and people's attention would be focused solely on the stories and what was happening on stage. Each performance was followed by a Q&A with the scriptwriters and some members of the research team. We originally scheduled 3 free shows in January 2015, but ended up doing 5 because the shows were overbooked. Given the community excitement, we decided to bring it back in the fall to use the show as a fundraiser for the library. We were able to secure corporate sponsors that underwrote the cost for each performance, and we sold out every show. While the stage show was a success for us, it was labor-intensive and time-consuming. So we began looking for a way to share the content beyond the walls of the theater. Dark Lacrosse Stories began in 2019 as a collaboration with the Lacrosse Tribune. After 5 years of the stage show, we had 50 stories that we turned into 50 episodes of a video series podcast found on YouTube and major podcast platforms. Complete with original music, historical photographs, and newspaper headlines that were featured in the stage production, each episode of Dark Lacrosse Stories also features bonus material from the research team. The Q&A portion of the stage show morphed into what we call a talkback played after the conclusion of the story, like I'm doing right now. With the success of Dark Lacrosse Stories, in 2020, the local Fox TV station approached us about an idea they had for an original production called Rivertown. They were interested in turning Dark Lacrosse content into a dramatized documentary series. The episode, Ballad of Brinkman Ridge, won a Midwest Regional Emmy Award in the historical documentary category in 2023. Some of our stories are wonderfully educational about particular local history topics like prohibition, sex work, the history of the police and fire departments, or Indigenous history. While we're always trying to find the dark nugget, often the historical context is just as fascinating. People are obsessed with true crime, and they're even more interested when they can connect to the story in some way. Content we've created for the walking tours, trolley tours, the stage production, the Dark Lacrosse Stories video series, and now the Rivertown TV show have been adapted and reused in countless ways. My team jokes that I'm constantly telling them to repurpose their research in ways for which it was not originally intended. And as I wrap up my 36 years in serving the lacrosse community as its archivist and begin a new life in retirement, the Dark Lacrosse suite of programs has been not only a lot of fun, but I feel will endure for a long time. Through this journey, I certainly learned a lot about lacrosse's past, and I hope you have too. The whole archives team has put a lot of work into this programming, particularly on the research and editing end. But Scott Brouwer deserves the bulk of your accolades as project manager for the entire series, from a walking tour to the theater stage to the recording studio. It was he who kept pushing me out of my comfort zone to be bolder and more public. And remember, the biggest lesson I have learned from researching all these great stories: if you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, always demand a jury trial. Thanks for listening.
Except Fred Schultz, he got a jury trial and he was guilty. So all the rest, many of the rest of our stories, though, people got off. So I would encourage you to check out more of those. The Footsteps of Lacrosse walking tours, we're doing some in May and June. So May 5, 12, 19, and then June 2, 9, and 16, different walking tours that you can get on. So encourage you to look at that as well. Those are architectural and cultural history walking tours as well. So we have this is the big flyer of that as well. Any questions about any of that? Anybody, now you've heard of Walter Getzinger? Was that a fascinating story? We thought so too. So that's what we just, from those first initial nuggets of stories, we found more and found more and found more. And then when we learned about his life, and then when we found in even a deeper search, the much later story involving his son, which is that whole second episode, what a fascinating connection to it.
Is he buried in La Crosse?
Walter?
Yeah.
Yes, in Oak Grove. Yep. I believe he is buried here as well, and then the two shells. I'm just gonna lose the batteries. Must be dying. The two shells are buried here as well. Yeah, so a lot of them were downtown. There was one on Jackson and West Avenue was one of them. I can't remember which one of those. The Strand, thank you. But a lot of them were downtown. So the Majestic was right next to, thanks, Emily. Thank you, Emily. The Majestic was the parking lot for the cathedral next to the rectory. So that burned down. So there was a popcorn and ice cream shop that actually is now closed too, kind of right there where Main Street curves. That's where the Majestic was. It was also called the Wisconsin Theater, but that burned in the early 1950s. 53. Casino Theater, I'm not sure. That's one I'd have to go look again. But obviously we know where the Hollywood is. We know where the Rivoli is. The Strand, not the Strand. The Rialto was downtown. The Lyric Theater was on Main Street as well. And they became movie theaters. A lot of them were built as vaudeville, and then they became movie theaters. The Rivoli and the Riviera, those were purpose-built for movies. Yeah.
The Rivoli, now, we saw the slides for the, 2010, 20, but in fifties is when I went there to see films, and the sides, there was a castle motif. Well,
Yep.
when did?
So that's still there. Yeah, so if you haven't been in the Rivoli recently, the interior motif, it looks like a castle. Yep, that's all still there. Yep, they've maintained it. Yep. Yeah, so you can still see when you go in the Rivoli, there was a stage and the organ was off to the side. We actually have the blueprints for the original Rivoli upstairs too, as part of the Parkinson and Dockendorf collection. Good question. They don't know. So the Gillette family, who owns it now, I talked to them recently when I said we're developing this story and we wonder if we can come in and take a look around. The organ is no longer there, so do not know what happened with the organ. Well, I will turn it back over. You guys have a wonderful day.